When you start learning React, you will probably feel lost at first if you are not familiar with the ES6 syntax. I will show you in this video some of the features I think are important to know before you start learning React. So let's create a new folder called ES6, cd into it. We will create two files, an HTML, a simple file, and a JavaScript file in a new folder called JS. And now let's open the HTML file. So now let's generate a simple HTML file, HTML code. I use a snippet that I have. It's basically just generates a simple HTML template. And I can give here a title. And that's it. We'll see it's basically loading the JavaScript file here. So let's open that in the browser. And we will see this. Let's show the console here. And let's open the JavaScript file. And see if it's basically doing something. So yeah, it's working. So the first thing I want to show you here is the variables, the new way to declare variables, var, const, and let. Before ES6, we only had one way to declare variables in JavaScript. That was using var, the var keyword. And I will try to show you some of the differences between the var and const and let. So for example, if we know that in many languages we can use constants, and even the syntax is very similar. For example, in PHP, basically you just use the const keyword, the name of your variable, and the value you want to assign. But in JavaScript, you basically, if you want to reassign the value here, for example, you will get an error if you want to, if you do that. For example, let's refresh this page. Oh, sorry, where is my beam? Okay, so if you see here, we got a type error because we can't assign this variable a new value. That's basically one of the restrictions we have with constants. If we use, for example, an object, let's say, let's create a new object here with an ID, a name, an email, say gmail.com. Let's close this. Basically, if you want to change something in this object, for example, then the email, .com. Let's const that, and let's remove this here. If you see, it basically worked. There was no type error or something, and that's because you can modify the properties in an object, but you can reassign the to this variable a new object. That's basically the thing. If you want to, for example, assign this something new. Oh, sorry. that's where you get the error. So it happens, it's very similar if you have an array. Let's say you have an array called IDs. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you want to change this array, you can do that. For example, you can say in the change the, actually it's the 4th position, assign 6, for example, and let's console.log that. You see that this position was changed to 6, so it's correct. We can change the content of the array, but it's very similar to the other example. We cannot change the array itself. If we do that, we get the error, the type error. So let's say we have a for loop. We will use bar as a keyword, starting at 0, I less than 10, increase I, and let's const.log this, and also here, and refresh to see what happens. And as we can see here, oh, let's do something else, like global context or global scope, and for here. So as we can see here, the loop is going from 0 to 9 here, and the last one is when we console log outside the for loop, and it shows global equals 10. That's because we can access this bar here from the global context. And if we use let, we'll see the difference. We get an error here on this line. That's because the I is basically not being, we can access I from here because it's in the for loop. That's the scope that now has the let variables. So that's one of the difference, and we cannot use constants here because basically we are reassigning the value in the loop. So one more thing. So now let's see what happens when we redeclare these variables. For example, let's use the bar keyword first. And let's see what happens. And as we can see, we can assign another value to this bar, unlike with constants, but basically it will take the last value that we declare. But if we use let, we should get a syntax error because this variable was defined before. So that's one of the difference between bar and let. What else? Well, basically, if you use constants, you should use constant if you know the value will not change in the application, in the program, and you should use let if you know the value will change, basically. So I think right now, basically, everything defaults to const. Basically, it's probably what most people is doing, using constant spheres, and if they are sure that they will change the value, they will basically use a let variable. So now let's see arrow functions, another feature of ES6. Let's say we have a function like this. Sum equals to function a and b, and we return a plus b. So what we are doing here is we are defining a constant named sum with the, we are using the anonymous function, and we are using the function keyword. And let's call this function, and let's actually show this result here. Refresh. Oh, so actually I need to pass something, obviously. So we get 3, and there in ES6 we have another way to define this same function, and it's like this. We don't need this keyword here. We need to add an equal sign and a greater than. Like this is basically usually called a fat arrow. So with this arrow we are basically using ES6 notation, and it's the same result. So this works. But if we want to simplify this more, when basically an error function always return the value, so we could say this, it will be like this, and it still works. Basically the result from this expression will be returned implicitly, so that works. And we can also define default values in ES6. So for example, we can say this, just pass one parameter to the function, so it will be like 1 plus 5, so it's 6. What else we can do? I think that's basically it with error functions. So we need to get used to this syntax, because everybody uses this in React. So let's check another feature called Destructuring Assignment. Something like this, if I can actually write this. Yeah. Destructuring Assignment of arrays and objects is basically assigning an object of an array to some variables in basically in less characters. So let's see an example. So if we have a user array, for example, here, again, one named Carlos, and we want to assign these to individual variables. For example, ID equals users to ID, name equal user.name. So we will need to do that. Let's console.log this and this, and we will get name and ID. So to save some lines of code, we could use the new syntax, which is like this: const, we open curly braces, we use ID here, name here, close curly braces, and we assign the object, and we refresh. So in this case, these two variables will take the properties from the object. These basically are the keys, the property names of the object. So if we want, we can do like changing the name of the variable. For example, let's make this uppercase. This will be first name, and here we should, let's do this again, ID and first name. We get the same result with the different variable names. So and well, another thing we can do something similar with arrays. For example, let's define an array called OS. Let's list some here: Linux, Mac, Windows, and let's say we assign this to OS1, the first element of the array. OS2 will be the second element of the array, and OS3 will be the third element of the array. We console.log this, and let's see what we get. We get Linux, Mac, and OS3 is not defined because this is 1. This is 2, sorry. Okay, so same thing. We'll save all these lines of code just doing something like this: OS1, OS2, OS3 equals OS. The only difference between this and the objects syntax is that we use brackets instead of curly braces. So yeah, I think that's it for destructuring. So now let's check the spread operator. This one is basically a feature that allows you to copy arrays and objects in a simpler way. So let's define an array here. Say this one is called numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's define another one called numbers 2. And I want this second one to be a copy of the first one. So what I do is use 3 dots here, and we put the name of the first array, which is numbers 1. And if we console.log this, we should have the same arrays here. So yeah, they look the same: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we want, we can add more values to the array. For example, let's say we want to add another element to the array. We can do that like this, just with a comma, and it's basically called the spread operator because basically we'll spread all the elements of this array here. Let's see another example with objects. Let's say we have an object called user again. I should have copied this, but anyway. ID and name Carlos, and let's say we want another user 2, and we use the 3 dots here, user, and if we console.log this, we get user 1 and user 2, and they should be the same. If I do it right, oh, sorry, it's not. Well, actually, let's call this user 1, so it makes more sense. User 1, user 1, user 1. Where is user? So they are exactly the same. We just basically copy that. We can do the same as with arrays. We can add more properties to the array. Say we add an email here. We can see the second array have the email. What else? Yeah, basically it's a merge. If we have, for example, an email here, you will get the value from this one. As you can see, the original one is Hotmail, but as we set email here with Gmail, the second array will become we'll use the second email. This is also useful if we want to call functions that take multiple arguments and we have an array. So for example, let's define an array here, 1, 2, 3, and if we want to call math.max function, we won't get anything. We will have to pass each parameter. Well, I'm not really console.log in this, so let's do it right. Result. It's not a number, so I need to pass each element of the array. Number 1 and numbers 2. So we get the maximum is 3, which is right. But again, we don't want to do that because basically it will be the elements will be hard coded. So if we want to use the spread operator, we just need to do the 3 dots, the name of the array, and we get the same result. Also, another thing we can do with the spread operator, if we define a constant name, say this one is Carlos, we can define another constant that will be an array, and we just put the name of the string constant, and if we console.log this, we will get an array, as we can see here. Okay, so I think that's it for the spread operator. So now let's check res parameters. Res parameters are very similar to, the syntax is very similar to the spread operator. Let's say we have a function here, anonymous function, and we will use the old syntax. We have 2 arguments, a and b. We will return a plus b. Let's define another variable here. Then we will assign the result from calling this function. And let's console.log this. And we get 3. So what if we want to pass more arguments to this function? 2 more. We'll get the same result. So before ES6, there is this object called arguments, and you can see here are the other arguments that we are passing. But this is an object, this is not an array, so we can loop those arguments or apply other functions to, like the ones for array. So with using the new ES6 feature, we can do something like this: arguments, and we can do arguments here, 0, arguments here, 1, and you can see I get the 3 because this is an array. So sorry. So let's console log args, and it's an array. So we could do something better here, which is looping this array. So for example, let's say we have a total and we have a for loop, and we will assign this to this total here and return total. So we will get 10, which is correct. Yeah. And basically this method, this function now will take any number of arguments. It doesn't matter. So that's the res parameters. So now let's check template literals. Let's clear this up. Let's define a new variable called first name. Let's define this one. Another one called hello. So we can see in this variable hello, we are concatenating these two strings, and we do that using the plus sign here. And we console log this new string here. So yeah, if we have just two, maybe it's okay, but if we have more strings and these things get a little bit more complex, like if we have more quotes here, yeah, it will be a lot more complex. So the new feature called template literals is basically uses basically this character called backtick character, which is like this. It's under the escape key in my Mac. Basically I can do this. I can use $, open curly braces, use the name of the variable, close the curly braces, and close with another backtick character. And I will get the same result. And in this way it's easier to add quotes or things like that. So I think this is really cool. Another feature is that we can basically do multi-lines. It will work. We just do our basically a return at the in the middle of the string. So let's check another feature called the map function. This one is This function allows you to apply a function to every element in an array, and it will return basically a new array. The whole function will return a new array. So let's see an example which is easier. Let's create a new array of objects. Let's say we have an ID here, and we have a name, and another object here, and a name here, and thanks to Prettify we have the semicolon and the commas. So let's console log this, and we see we have the two objects in the array. So now let's say we want to create a new array with only the IDs of this array of users. So let's create a new array here called user IDs, which will be empty by default, and let's loop the users array. So until the users is the users.length and increase I, and let's do here user IDs push, and here will be on this position, and we will pass the ID for the element in that position, and at the end we will console.log the user IDs, and we get here, we can see we get an array with two items, the 1 and 2, which are the IDs of the users of array. So yeah, this looks correct, but we can do, with the new syntax, we can simplify this a lot. For example, we can define here a constant called user IDs, and on the users array we call map, and we pass here this is the one of the items of the array, and in the anonymous function we will have the user ID here. This is similar to saying return user ID. Let's do it like this first. We got an error because I forgot to add this comma. No? Oh. Okay. I forgot to close this function. User IDs is not defined. User IDs is not defined. Yeah, it's not defined here. So now we have a new array here, and as we can see, we have the two values, and it was allowed let's code, but we can actually make this less code. We can actually make this just one line like this, because in this case the return will be implicit, as we saw in the arrow functions. So we'll be returning the user ID and this will create a new array with all the user IDs. So just in one line. Yeah, the map function is used in React a lot in JSX. Basically when you want to loop elements in, for example, in a list component. So let's try an example here. We don't have JSX, but let's try to do something here. We call map here. This is the user. This is the item user in the array. And we use literals here. And let's say we want to create a list. And we want to pass here the ID of the user. Let's close the lead tag. And here will be the name of the user. And we console.log this. And we will get a list of, well, this is a string, but if this were React, it will be JSX, so it will be something like this without the backtick. So yeah, anyway, this is the map function. So now let's check another function called filter. Actually, let's use this code here. Filter is not EX6, is EX5, but I think it's really important to understand how it works because it's used a lot in React. So let's say we have this array of users, and we want to get a new array with only the users that have this property deleted equal to true. So let's create these two properties here. Let's check that this looks correct. Yeah, we have true, but let's make actually this one false. And let's create a new array called deleted users. And let's call users.filter here. And is the syntax similar? We pass one of the items of the array here. And we have a condition here. In this case, if the user.deleted is true, this item of the array will be passed to the new array. So in the end, we should only have the first element of the array, which is true. Let's see. So it looks correct. We only have the first one. Yeah, basically it's, if we want to use the other extended syntax, it will be something like this. Oh, sorry, I forgot to close this parenthesis here, and this doesn't need this. And we'll get the same result, but with more lines of code. So now let's check another feature of EX6, classes and subclasses. If you are a PHP developer or if you have used Java or any of the languages that support objects, you are probably familiar with this. But let's see how's the syntax in JavaScript, which is very similar. Let's see an example. Let's define a new class called user. So you use the keyword class, and we open and close curly braces, and we have to call we have to use a new keyword here called constructor. Yeah, it's constructor, and here we will pass all the parameters that we will use in this class, or the properties. So we will assign here the ID and the name. So now if we, for example, create an instance of this class, we will say const equals user, new user, and we pass the arguments, a name, an ID and a name. And let's console.log this, and we get an object with the ID 1 and the name Carlos. So now we can access these properties here with some methods. For example, let's say we want to log in and return a string as an example. We will use here template literals. This dot name is login, and let's say here login. Let's call the login method here, and we will get the result, which is Carlos is logged in. So we have access to the properties of this object with this keyword. So now let's say we want to create a new class that will be based on this one. This one will be called student, and we use the keyword extends, and next the name of the previous class. And we also need to call the constructor here. We need to use the same keyword, and we pass the same parameters. And we assign here the parameters to we assign here any new parameters that we want to use, or we can basically leave it like this. Let's try to create a new object, a new instance from this. Student. Okay, student. Okay, so we got an error. We have to call the super constructor if you want to use the this class, this keyword. We are not really using it, but that's something that we always need to do here. We need to call super ID name. This will basically call the parent class with these parameters, with these arguments. So now this works. Now we can basically add more properties to this class. For example, let's room 1. And we get here this instance with the ID, the name, and the room. We can call the login method in the user class, and we could also define new methods here. and use the properties in the same way. And the last feature of ES6 in this video is modules. Modules are the latest solution to the performance issues caused by loading multiple JavaScript files in a browser. And with the use of tools like Bubble, Webpack, and others, all the JavaScript code is properly concatenated in one big file. So let's see, I can basically show you this working, but I will try to explain it here. So let's say we have a file called mat.js, and in this file we have this keyword export, and we have a function called sum. We have some arguments, and basically we do something here, and we can use that function in another file if you use the keyword import, and we pass the name of the function in curly braces, and we say we use the keyword front, and we pass the path where the file is. If the file is in the same folder, it will be a /. So then we can use this function here in this another file, and you may have seen this in React in many different places. This is the way to import functions, and you can actually import objects and other variables from other files, but it's more common to see functions here. Another thing is you can have a default function or default export, and if you use the default keyword or default export, you need the curly braces. And if you have more functions here, more exports, I don't know, it will be the same, but let's see. Let's say we have another function called like that, add, and we will have we can add a comma separated values here for each name, and use that function in this new file. So I think that's it for this video. If you found something useful, leave a like, or if you don't want to miss any other video, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.